What's up, it's Cinema Shogun here, and when I first heard of the Idaho 4 case, my mind did not immediately go to, oh, this must have been a targeted attack. In fact, the first thing I thought was the exact opposite. I thought that this may be a crime of opportunity, a psychopath that just went on a rampage, not necessarily knowing who his victims were. Now, as more details came out about the case, I think there were a lot of signs pointing towards the fact that maybe the Idaho 4 were targeted. And when you look at a case like this, and you look at a situation like this, one detail that you always look at is if anything was stolen from the home. When you see a home intrusion where you have multiple casualties, or even one casualty, any casualty at all, investigators always look to see, was there anything stolen from the home? Because that right away could establish some sort of motive. Someone entered into the home wanting to break in, steal stuff, and, something took place that ended up in someone losing their life. Obviously, I don't think there was anything stolen from this home. It looked like someone just snuck in the wee hours of the morning, did this crazy act while other people were sleeping in the house, totally unharmed, and then just walked right out the door and got away with it. Now that the affidavit's been released, we know that at least one of the roommates heard and saw some of this stuff going down. They heard cries. They heard the dog barking. They heard thuds. They heard someone say someone was in the house, and they saw someone in the house, but they did nothing. So as these details start pouring out, I think, like I said, there were a lot of signs pointing towards the fact that maybe this was a targeted situation. But then, once Bryan Kohberger was captured, he was named as the suspect, and we got to learn more about Bryan Kohberger, I started to feel like, hey, you know what? Maybe this, for Bryan, was more about him committing the crime as opposed to who he committed the crime against. Looking at Bryan Kohberger's education, looking at his past, I couldn't help but feel like maybe in this situation was more so about the crime itself for Bryan and not so much about the actual people. Sure, maybe Bryan picked these people out to be the ones, you know what I mean, that he was going to try to do this to. But I felt like there was a huge possibility that Bryan chose someone at random, and that this was more so about the crime itself as opposed to the people. But then rumors started coming out, and these weren't really, I don't even want to call them rumors, because these were reports from credible sources, let's just say. And they talked about how, no, Bryan's phone was pinged at the same locations that some of these students were at. That Bryan must have been following them, stalking them for weeks. Once we got that news, it appeared to me that this was not just a random act. I mean, when I say a random act, what I mean is, I don't necessarily think Bryan just at random was like, all right, I'm going to go to this house tonight and do this. I do believe there was some planning involved, but I don't know if it was anything necessarily personal between Bryan and any of those 4 students. I thought maybe it was just something within Bryan that made him want to do this, and he picked out these people to do it too. But once this information came out about the stalking, that led me to believe that, yes, this is targeted. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Because I don't think that just because Bryan stalked these victims, I don't think that necessarily means it's targeted. Like, yeah, he zeroed in on who he wanted to do this to, but was there anything personal involved? When I think of targeted, I think of, oh, there was a personal issue that he had with one of these people. There was a motive. There was a reason why he chose these people. Now, we heard that he was watching them for weeks. And like I said, I think that was enough to prove that, hey, maybe this is targeted. But then again, maybe he's just canvassing out the area. You know, who knows what's going through this guy's mind. But now that the affidavit has been released, the affidavit has been released, it's been reported that Bryan was stalking that home. In fact, his phone was pinged outside of that home, just sitting there, chilling, about a dozen times, 12 times, 11 of which were in the late evening, early morning hours. But not only was Bryan watching this house, sitting outside of that house in his car, watching this house, a dozen times, Bryan's phone is pinged, sitting outside, watching that house in the wee hours of the morning, late hours of the night. But it appears that this goes all the way back to like June, July, August, the summertime. So no, Bryan was not following and watching the Idaho 4 for a few weeks. Bryan was watching them for months on end. Months on end. Now that leads me to believe that this was not as much so about the crime as opposed to maybe the individuals. Months on end, I think it's safe to say that Bryan maybe had an unhealthy obsession with one of those people in that house. I think it goes far beyond, oh, maybe someone pissed him off and he decided to do this. No, I think it goes far beyond that. For Bryan to have been watching this home for months, phone pinged outside of this house, late at night, early in the morning, a dozen times. And that's just all we know so far. One thing I want to make very clear to people, because I've seen people say that, oh, they don't got much evidence against Bryan. All they got is cell phone data and this. I can guarantee you all that we do not even know the half of it yet. You really think that they're going to give all of what they know and all of their evidence right here in these documents that were released today? Hell no. They give as much as they need to give to show why an arrest has been made, to show why Bryan needs to be sitting behind bars right now. The rest of the details will come out in court. Some, I don't even know if we'll ever hear all the details. But I can tell you right now for a fact that all of this information we got today, and it's damning evidence that they got on this guy. The cellular data, videos of his car leaving the scene, DNA on a sheath that was left at the scene. They got a lot of stuff on this guy that we already know about now because of the affidavit. But there's tons more that's going to come out. This is not all that they have. But to know that this sick, twisted, weird creepo was just outside of their house, chilling, watching their house for months. Now, we heard talks of a stalker. We even heard talks of multiple stalkers. We heard talks of that throughout this case, right? Is Bryan that guy? Or is it someone else? let's say at the end of the day, I don't think this is going to happen, but let's say Bryan is found innocent. Then how does Bryan explain why he was sitting outside of this house a dozen times, phone pinged outside of this house, chilling in the middle of the night, early into the morning? I'm really interested in seeing what this defense team comes up with. What type of alibis does Bryan have? Because he's going to have to come up with a hell of a lot of excuses as to why his vehicle and his cell phone were in certain places at certain times. So I don't know what's going to come of this. I don't know what story Bryan may concoct. But the evidence shows that Bryan was watching these 4 individuals, or at least some of them. He was watching that house for a long, long time. I thought it was creepy when reports came out that he was watching them for weeks. It made me feel icky and weird, like your skin is crawling. You know what I mean? Like creepy crawler type itch. And then you hear, what? Maybe as far back as June, July, August, Bryan is watching these people? Imagine that. And remember that this crime didn't take place until November 13th. Months on end. So I think it's safe to say at this point that I do believe that there's more to this than just, a random attack. And like I said, I know there's a lot of stuff out there that some of you all may say, that's obvious, obviously this, obviously that. But we've seen cases like this before. We've seen serial killers and crazy weirdos just do stuff to anybody, so you can't ever assume too much, because there are plenty of crimes that have taken place that when you look at them and you look at the way they were conducted, you look at how gruesome they are, you would think that there has to be some type of passion involved, that these people must know this victim. But in reality, no. They're just another person. Sometimes someone's just walking by your house and it's like, hey, I'm going to go in there and kill that person. It happens. It's scary, but it happens a lot. But in this case, at the very least, we don't know about the connections that Bryan may have had with certain individuals in that house, but at the very least, we know that Bryan was planning this and watching them for a long time. This was premeditated. And I guess Bryan maybe was just out there multiple nights trying to figure out when the time to strike would be. I wonder if in Bryan's mind, any of those nights could have been the night. All of those nights that his phone was pinged outside of that house, could any of those nights been the night? Was Bryan just, was Bryan prepared to do this at any time and he felt like November 13th that was the right time to go in and do this? Or was he just canvassing the house, just watching, collecting data and information, trying to notice certain schedules? I don't know. It's really creepy, but I could say one thing to all of you all watching this video. Please be more aware of your surroundings. I'm not saying that to place blame on anyone in that house, but ladies, specifically ladies and men too, when you go home at night, daytime, whenever, look around you. Every time I exit my house, I look around me. When I enter into a business, I look around me. I get a good idea of the area that I'm entering in. I get a good idea of where I can exit and things like that. Be aware of your surroundings. And I can't, stress that enough, especially for the women watching this video. Be aware. You see some creepy stuff? Don't be afraid to say something. Look around you before you enter your home. Make sure you're not being watched, because these people were being watched for months on end. And then this, you know what ultimately happened. So just be more aware, people. But let me know your thoughts about this down in the comments below. While you're down there, hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe, ring that notification bell, and I will talk to you all in the next video.